Good afternoon, all. We are about a minute late getting started today, so thank you for waiting. We have quorum, so we can begin, and now we have more than quorum walking in. I will call this regular meeting of council of the Municipality of Jasper to order for April 19th, 2022. Councillors, you have today's proposed agenda. Are there any additions, deletions, or other changes to be made to the agenda? If there are none, might I have a motion, please, to approve the agenda as presented? Thank you, Councillor Melnick. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. We have two sets of minutes for approval today. We will begin with the regular meeting minutes of March 15th, 2022. Those minutes have been circulated. Are there any errors, omissions, or corrections required to be made to those minutes? I will make one observation, if I may, or proposed change. The call to order is indicated to be 9:30 a.m., but this was a regular council meeting. It ought to have been 1:30. So a small change, but I would recommend that if there are no other changes, the minutes be approved with that one notation. Councillor, one more?
Yeah, if I'm the only one, if I was the only councillor absent, I believe there should be 6 councillors in favor, unless somebody was late.
And somebody was late, and that was Councillor Wilson. Well, we're talking about the previous minutes, yes. But it does reveal that Councillor Wilson joined the meeting at 1:34 p.m. But I think he was only 4 minutes late, but he might have been 4 hours and 4 minutes late.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Whatever. Could I have a motion then to approve the minutes of March 15th as presented with one change as to the time of call to order? Thank you, Councillor Paul. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. And then we also have for approval today the special meeting minutes of March 29th, 2022, which have also been circulated. Are there any errors, omissions, or corrections required to be made to those minutes? If there are none, might I have a motion, please? A motion from Councillor Calagranti to approve the minutes of the special meeting of March 29th, 2022 as circulated. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Is there any business arising from the previous minutes? Councillor Melvin.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. Is there any updates as to the status of the special meeting that we had as to moving forward for our restaurant folks?
I will turn that to Mr. Given, if you will, please.
Sure. Thanks very much, Your Worship. Yes, immediately following the special meeting, administration, Ms. Nadon, Director Nadon, submitted the municipality's discretionary use permit application that's been received back from Parks with approval. They provided opportunity for both the 2022 opportunities as well as before opportunities for future years. Administration is currently examining that and working to establish a process to allow restaurateurs and interested parties, the restaurant operators or not, to apply for commercial use of public space for the supplemental program, as was discussed at the committee meeting. I would expect that will come out over the next week or so. Administration is well aware of the timelines that the businesses are facing, and so we want to ensure that we get that speedy turnaround from Parks, followed by a speedy turnaround from the municipality back up to restaurants and businesses.
Thank you for that, Mr. Given, and thank you, Councillor Melnick, for raising that. And if you would at least on my behalf, and I expect on behalf of council to pass thanks and gratitude on to Parks Canada for that very quick turnaround. I know that those engaged in the industry are very anxious to know the path forward. So it's very much appreciated that the response is what it was and in the time that it came. So thank you for that. Is there any other business arising from either the minutes of March 15th or March 29th? I then had one matter arising from the minutes of March 15th. At that time, council directed that I write a letter to the Minister of Municipal Affairs concerning the reduction in grants in place of taxes, which has been done. And I would just like at some point to see that letter be appended to an agenda, perhaps just as an item of correspondence for information, just to allow council and the community to know that the letter went out and what it said. If there is nothing else, then agenda item 5, presentations. I expect we have Mr. Bertel standing by online to give us a presentation with respect to assessments on behalf of our assessor, Accurate Assessment Group Limited.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
We can,
Excellent.
yes, thank you.
Perfect. Thanks again for the opportunity to present to council today. I believe you've all been given a copy of my report, but I will share my screen and go through it with you. I understand we are on somewhat of a time constraint, so I'll try to go quickly, but at any point, if there are questions, please feel free to jump in. Okay. So can you see my screen okay there?
We see a screen, but if it is the municipality of Jasper logo, that's what we see.
Perfect. Okay, now I just got to figure out how I can see my cell phone here. Perfect. Okay, so the purpose of today is to introduce those of you from council that don't know who I am and what I do. As well, the biggest takeaway from today is to give you some information regarding what changed year over year in your assessment base and how that will be represented in terms of tax and / assessment shifting within your municipality. And then just give you a quick little overview of the outstanding assessment complaints. Some of you have seen this, so bear with me for the repetitiveness, but I just want to give those new members of council an understanding of the jurisdictions in Alberta that Accurate Assessment represents. This map highlighted in green gives you a pretty good idea. We represent many municipalities types across the province, including the larger ones on this map are rural in nature, of course. I myself am the appointed assessor for 4 cities in Alberta as well. So our urban and rural representation is quite broad. Our head office is in Whitecourt, and I am located in Whitecourt in one of our sub offices. As noted, 20 rural municipalities, 6 cities, 8 towns, 18 Métis settlements. It makes up our client base. Quickly, I just want to inform council or let council know that I look as myself to be your trusted advisor for all things assessment. If you have any questions about how assessment works, how it might relate to your municipality, please feel free to reach out. I have no issues at all answering any kinds of assessment questions. We've got all kinds of different specialists within our company, and in total, we represent over 400 years of experience in the assessment industry. Just a list of some of the staff that might be involved in your assessment. I am 99% of the assessment related duties for Jasper. I like to list these folks here just to give you some comfort that there are many other staff included in our company that can take over the reins should the need arise. Okay. So 2020 compared to 2021 assessment base. I've broken your total assessment base into 4 groups. You can see here on this slide that the residential base is increased by about 8%, while your non-residential base is decreased by 3%. I'm going to get into that in a little bit more detail for you in a few slides. But right out of the gates, that should show you or tell you that you see some assessment shifting in your municipality. Again, I'm going to get into the reasons as to why this has occurred. I'll give you 2020 versus 2021 in a visual pie chart. You can see on the right-hand side under 2021 that the residential percentage of the total is greater than it was last year. That's a result of the residential base increasing and the non-residential base decreasing. Another visual chart for you. You can see in the blue, the residential, that we've had continued growth for many years in Jasper. Last year in residential, we saw slight growth. This year, we're seeing strong growth again. Some of the municipalities that I represent aren't as fortunate as this in terms of market value. In other words, oil and gas is a primary driver in so many municipalities in Alberta. Jasper, that is not the case. The price of oil can go up and down, and it may have some bearing on the market value, but by no means does it have a deep impact on values. That's from a residential perspective, at least. Now, if you look at the yellow, you can see over the years, it's gone up and down a little bit. And in the last couple of years, we've seen a decline in the non-res base. This is, I'm going to get into it in more detail, but due primarily to the lodging industry suffering through COVID. And a significant part of your non-res assessment base is comprised of the hotel industry. Moving on, just give you a complete everything all in representation. Again, in other clients that I represent, this goes up and down versus in Jasper, it's you can draw a pretty straight line across that, and that's continued growth. %90 of your properties increased by status quo to up to 25% increase. So the majority of your properties are somewhere in this category where there's a bit of an increase. There are some that went down. There are some that went up more than this, but the majority of your base falls within this category. To give you a breakdown by percentage, it sticks out like a sore thumb, where the concentration of this breakdown is. The vast majority falls within that 1 to 10% increase. And that correlates with what I showed you earlier in that the entire residential base increased by 8%. This particular chart gives you a breakdown between res and non-res, and both follow that same sort of trend. I give you the same info based on a dollar comparison. So again, the majority of your properties increased by roughly $10,000 to $100,000. And then there are, of course, some that increased by more than 100,000 as well. Breakdown by type and change by dollar. Residentially speaking, the majority fall within the $25,000 to $100,000 range of change. Visually across the municipality, the darker the red, the higher the change, the darker the blue, the higher the negative change. So red is a positive change, blue is a negative change. When you look at the blue, it sticks out which properties in Jasper have decreased. If you excluded the blue, everything is, in that increased by 1 to 10% range, generally speaking. I give you a distribution of the residential assessed values. So if you start from the left, the 0 to 200,000 and even the 200 to 400,000, these are your condo style properties. Perhaps the co-ops are in this category as well. Moving into the 4 to 600 and $600,000 to $800,000 range. That's your typical, older Jasper town site residential base. Moving up to the 8 to $1 million. Now you're talking about the properties that are newer, perhaps down into the Cabin Creek area, or even older properties that have been extensively renovated would fall into that category. The 1 to 1.2 million, these are properties that are both of those things, newer and have been renovated. We're seeing sales in Jasper on the residential side that are above $1 million. It's more and more common now. I remember it wasn't that long ago that we didn't have any above $1 million residential properties, but nowadays it's not surprising to see it all. And then moving over to the far right hand column, the 1.8 and up, this is basically your Lake Edith properties where the land alone is valued at 1.5 million plus. Give you the same idea for non-res properties. Starting on the left, the 0 to 500,000, a lot of these properties would be in the industrial subdivision. Not very many properties in the main commercial area along Connaught and Patricia would fall into that category. That would be your next several 500,000 to even up to $3 million properties, and some of them are higher than that even. And then to the far right, the 5 million and up, now you're talking about your specialized hospitality type properties, your larger hotels and things like that. So not only is the hotel the largest part of your sector, they comprise the biggest assessments of the non-res properties as well. Just some general data. New parcels this last year, there were 6. You look back to 2019, we saw 66 new parcels. That's really extraordinary in Jasper. But what that was the Aspen Garden condos. Used to be a rental property, was condominiumized. So all of a sudden there are a whole bunch of more properties in Jasper. As you look to 2021, the increased parcels there would be due to duplex properties being split into 2 separate parcels. Then at the bottom, the development permits. As you may be aware, we obtain all permit information from Parks Canada. That tells us where to go. For example, when there's a new home constructed, or maybe there's a slight renovation, or whatever the case is, Parks Canada provides us with all that information. I just want to give you a little bit more information regarding the change by area. I'm sure all of these particular areas highlighted on this slide are known to everyone listening. As you can see, the residential town site, we saw roughly a 10% increase. And as you go down through the list there, you can see each individual area. Again, noting the commercial areas is the only one that we're seeing a decrease in overall. And these numbers here are really based on this information. And what this is a representation of the assessment as compared to the sale price within those particular areas. So for example, the residential town site, we had 21 sales between July 1st, 2020 and July 1st, 2021. Those are the market indicators that we use to increase or decrease assessments as needed. That's what tells us where the assessments need to be. So you can see 21 sales represented a median assessment to sales ratio of 100%. Now, if we go to the far right column on the first line, there were 19 sales that have occurred after July 1st, 2021. Now, those are going to be sales we use for next year's assessment because we're always a year behind. So we're still compiling sales and it'll lead up to July 2022. But if you look at this information, it's already indicating a continued growth in the residential assessment base based on sale prices. And I show you that information all the way through the different areas of the municipality. If I can get you to look at the bottom overall line, there were 48 sales between July 1, 2020 and July 1, 2021. That represent a 100% median assessment to sales ratio. So from the audit perspective, that meets the tests. Then if we jump ahead to sales after July 1, 2021, you can see that median falls, which tells me that, again, there will be an increase in the assessments moving forward next year, which isn't surprising to me, and I don't think it would be a surprise to anyone else as well. I'm going to shift over a little bit to the non-res side and how it relates to assessment shifting within your assessment base. As you know, hotels the assessment is based on the income approach. So what that means is the net operating income divided by a cap rate gives us the value, a capital value. So prior to COVID, the hotel industry in Jasper was strong. People were spending money on getaways. People were coming from overseas to stay in Jasper, and that represented strong revenues for the hotel sector. COVID hits, and a lot of things happened. People not only stopped going out to enjoy Jasper, but legally, people from overseas weren't even allowed to come here. So right out of the gates, we lost a revenue source that impacted the assessed value significantly because it affected the net operating income of these properties. So overall, you saw me report earlier that we recognized a 3% loss in assessment on the non-res side. Well, what that really is broken down to is a 13% drop in the hotels portion of it. And the non-hotel properties are seeing a little bit of an increase. So moving on to that, the non-hotel properties are also assessed based on the income approach, but that income isn't the income of the business, it's the income of the real estate. So for example, if someone owns a property and leases it to me, it's that income that is recognized. It's not how many hamburgers I might sell as the business owner or how many t-shirts. It's how much I paid to occupy that property. And that lease is generally a 3 to 5, sometimes 10 to 20 year term. So it's a lot more stable than a hotel income stream, which is nightly and can turn on and off by the flick of a COVID switch, for example. So what that means is the non-hotel, non-residential base is a lot more stable than the hotel part of it, simply from the risk perspective. So overall, excluding the hotels, the non-res base increased by 4%, yet the total non-res base decreased by 3%. So you not only have a shifting between residential and non-residential, you also have a shifting within your non-residential between hotels and non-hotels. So to summarize the shifting, overall residential is up 8%, overall non-residential is down 3%. That represents a tax burden shifting towards the residential payer. And then within the non-res class, as I noted, the non-hotel portion increased by 4% and the hotel portion decreased by 13%. And that represents a shifting in the non-res base away from the hotel properties. Assessment complaints. So property owners are provided the opportunity to discuss their assessment with me. By legislation, there is a 60-day complaint period from the date the municipality mails the assessment notices. Within that 60 days, they have the ability to discuss their assessment with me. I'll discuss their assessment at any time throughout the year, but if at that time, within that 60-day period, if they're unhappy with the results of our conversation, they have the ability to file an assessment complaint. Many non-res property owners have tax agents that represent them to discuss their assessments with me. And this year was not unlike any other year, where many of those conversations were held in the last couple of days of the 60-day period. It seems to me that we could make that period a 5-day period and we'd get the same amount of discussions in, but that's a topic for another day, I suppose. So in the end, for this year, there were no residential assessment complaints filed and 2 non-residential complaints filed. One of those complaints was filed due to, I believe their words were something like, we didn't have enough time to discuss it, so we got to file a complaint, even though there were 60 days. But nonetheless, that one has been withdrawn, and there is one outstanding assessment complaint left to be dealt with. Of course, I will keep administration informed about anything that comes from that. The worst case, not worst case, but a potential scenario is we don't come to an agreement, and then ultimately there would be a hearing about that assessment. Just give you a couple of last little pieces of information about my assessment reinspection cycle. You can see on the map here, it's divided into 5 separate areas of the main site, Jasper site. Though this doesn't mean that if it falls outside of that area that we don't deal with the assessment. What this means is we're concentrating on this area. So I will be updating information on file of the properties in the yellow. I will update all my exterior photos, and we also have mailed a residential request for information to all of those property owners. So if you live within that yellow area, you would have received a letter from me. And the purpose of the letter is to obtain as much information as we can about the property and to confirm the information that we already have. So lastly, next steps, as you're aware, we had an open house on March 22nd. I think I spoke with a couple of ratepayers at that meeting. One of them is sitting at your table today. Again, of course, today's council presentation. I will be dealing with the final assessment complaint and carry on with the monitoring real estate values and new constructions as informed by Parks Canada. With that, I know that's a lot of information very quickly. Please feel free to fire any questions my way.
Thank you, Mr. Brittles. Always a pleasure to have you present. I just wanted to start by referencing your early remarks about your availability, and I can say from my perspective, you have indeed always been very available when I've had calls and very responsive to my inquiries. So I invite councillors, if they don't formulate the question today, to give you a call in the weeks or months to come as they become familiar. But to start with, we do have some questions for you today, and I'll start with Councillor Wilson and then Councillor Hall.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I've got a few questions. I'll just jump on the one that just popped up, and I wanted to jump in when you were speaking about it. But it's about the request for the assessment complaint for $5 million. Is that one property?
That's one property. So, but that $5 million is essentially the difference between the current assessment and the requested assessment that they put on their assessment complaint. It's very common for the complaint to note a low assessment. And I think the perspective from their point is, if we don't ask for it, we're not going to get it. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get it either, right?
Okay, and yeah, so it just seems like a bit of an anomaly, something pretty large in my eyes.
Yep.
And I guess shooting for the stars, maybe, I don't know, but that one is a bit of a red flag. It's a bit scary to see that number. And then I guess my question is, do you see that often? Like, I haven't seen it on my time on council, but maybe I've just, overlooked it.
It's not uncommon to see that magnitude of a request for properties that are assessed higher than $10 million. I have another client that closed yesterday, and this morning I received a handful of complaints filed by tax agents. Like I said earlier, they file on the last minute, and every single one of them is between $1 million and $3 million of a request. It's the nature of their business model.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I've got further questions, but I could pass it off to Councillor Hall for that.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland, and thank you very much for your presentation. I am a new councillor, so I have a couple questions for you.
Certainly.
One is, what kind of properties are exempt?
What kind of properties are exempt? That would be things like schools and churches. Some federal property in Jasper is exempt. A lot of federal property in Jasper is taxable via grants or payments in lieu of taxes. Primarily, that exempt is comprised of schools and churches.
Okay, thank you. And my second question, and I apologize if it's I'm not even sure how to ask it, but I'm looking on page 43 of our agenda, and it's the overview. So 110% means that went up by 10%. 97 means it went down by 3%. Is that correct?
That's right.
So then the 100, what is that date? Was that based on when this company started assessing, or is it something else?
Based on last year's total.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Calhoun.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess. I think I asked this question most years, but especially for the new councillors, well, can you explain how you assess Home Accommodation Association? And where does that fit this year? Do they go down or up in their assessments?
So the private home accommodations in Jasper are it's a unique thing across our assessment base. We don't see it in any other municipalities, but how the complete assessment is calculated is based on market value. So what is a similar property selling for in Jasper? And then if there is a home accommodation, we apply the non-residential assessment or tax rate to a portion of the property. So for example, if a home is assessed at 900,000 and there's a private home accommodation and we apply a 10% non-res tax rate, that means 810,000 is taxed residentially and 90,000 is taxed commercially. Therefore, their tax burden is higher than the property right beside them that does not operate a private home accommodation and is also assessed at 900,000. We don't and haven't ever requested financial statements for a private home accommodation, and the reasons are that many of these property owners, they may have a separate business set up for just that private home accommodation. It might be part of their other umbrellas, but at the end, it's really the information that we would collect from them wouldn't be able to tell us what a potential purchaser would be willing to pay for the property based on the income stream, because the income stream is such a small part of the value of the property. Conversely, if you look at a hotel, the income stream is the only motivation that a potential purchaser would look at, right? On the private home accommodation property, they're going to live in the majority of the properties. So they're willing to pay X amount of money for it to do that and enjoy it and feel it's worth based on that. The hotel property, they want to buy it because there's going to be so many people coming to spend X amount of dollars in their property. And that's really what their motivation is in that regard. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, can I ask you one more question on that? So if you had two houses that were each worth the same, and you had one home accommodation doing 3 rooms in their house, and one doing 1 room in the house, would they be taxed the same, or would they be taxed differently?
The one with 3 would have a slightly higher tax rate. We do recognize that there's more commercial use on the 3 room versus the 1 room, so we apply a higher percentage of non-residential.
Councillor Mullen.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. And if I could ask a question as it relates to what is page 44 of our agenda, but it's the sales comparison by area, and it lists residential, town site, cabin creek, etc.
Mm-hmm.
The number of sales that you recorded is 21 sales. So that is from July 1st of 2020 until June 30th of 2021.
Correct.
Okay. And just to help me understand, that's the residential side of the assessment. How does the commercial side of assessments work? Does it work on the same calendar of July 1 to June 30th?
It does. And you may be alluding to the request for information that we send to non-residential property owners requesting financial statements and whatnot. It's the important part is a year's worth of financials. Am I correct in making that assumption, or am I going off your train?
I guess I wanted to confirm all non-commercial or non-resident assessments are based on the same calendar period. It sounds like they're not. It's a 12-month period, but it could vary between business.
No, it's still the same 12-month period. If we were in an example in Jasper where there were multiple sales of non-res properties every year, it'd be far easier. But you know, and I know that the number of sales in Jasper on the non-res side are so few and far between that it's impossible to be that confident in the market data. But legislatively, it's still July 1st is the valuation date, and sales leading up to that July 1st date from the year prior are considered. Now, the provincial audit says, but if you don't have a lot of sales, you got to go back 3 years. And so ultimately, my assessments are audited on a 3-year sales window. I've highlighted here for you the most recent year leading up to July 1st. But at the end of the day, on the commercial side, there are so few sales that it's difficult to establish what if there should be a difference in the cap rate pre-July 2021 and post-July 2021.
I may not have been explaining myself very well. So hotels are assessed based on the income approach. And the income approach, I guess the question is, the income period.
Yeah.
Is that July 1 till June 30th?
I got you. So yes, ideally, the property owner or tax agent, whoever responds to the request for information, provides me with the 12-month period leading up to July 1st, 2021. And most hotel properties in Jasper have the ability to do that within their accounting system. They can say, generate me a report for 12 months leading up to here. Some don't have that ability, and I'm not going to ignore information that they provide that might be a 12-month period that's slightly different. But I do have to recognize if there's something different in the calendar year or the 12-month period that they submitted, I have to be able to recognize if there should be something considered on the assessment due to that. Like COVID, for example, like that was a huge thing this year and for the last couple of years. So I guess to answer your question, that's what we were requesting, the 12 months leading up to July 1st, 2021. But if they give me 12 months, that's a different 12-month period, I'm not going to ignore it.
Thank you again. And again, you're using a 3-year rolling based on each business and what period of revenue or net income that they're reporting.
That's right. And that's especially true for hotels. And, I can give you some perspective on that. We use a 3-year weighted average for hotel properties. And so we'll use 50% of the most current year, then 30, and then 20 to get 100% total. And the reasons why we do that is because of things like COVID or things like a pipeline going through town where there might be a spike in 1 year. And if that's unrealistic or not normal, a potential buyer is going to know that, and they aren't going to pay extra just because that 1 year had more income, or they might not pay less just because that 1 year had less income. But if it's an extended thing like COVID's been, then it's going to be something that potentially could impact the value of the property and has been recognized on the assessment. Ultimately, why you're seeing a reduction in your hotel portion of your assessment base.
Great, thanks for that additional explanation. I think it adds a lot more clarity as to the decrease of 13% compared to the total non-residential decrease of 3%.
Yeah.
If I could pick up on that, and I see Councillor Wilson has additional questions, but in your first response to Councillor Melnick, you mentioned the cap rate. I just want to clarify whether the cap rate is the same for all non-residential assessments, or whether it might vary with the particular. So you've indicated hotels being particularly susceptible to the COVID situation, but other commercial properties where there is a landlord that continues to collect rent, it's not quite the same. And so COVID might impact business, but if it's not the landlord's business, it doesn't have the same effect on the property value. But does any of that affect the cap rate, or is the cap rate just set and consistent between all classes?
Ultimately, the cap rate is a measure of risk, right? And hotels, especially in COVID, have more risk, which means less value to the real estate. So to answer your question, no, hotels and retail do not have the same cap rate in Jasper. Retail, offices, restaurants, and those types of properties do have the same cap rate. It depends on who you ask, though. You know what, an appraiser might say, yeah, they would be the same, but if it's a newer property, maybe there's less risk and they might apply a slightly lower cap. Or if it's an older property and needs maintenance or something like that, they might say if there's more risk and possibly apply a slightly higher cap. But generally speaking, that sector of the base would be a very consistent cap rate. It would not be normal to say that cap rate translates automatically to hotel properties or even apartment buildings for that matter. That those are three distinct areas of valuation that you'd see three different caps.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I do have some other questions, but so does Councillor Wilson, so I'll turn to him first.
Okay.
I guess slightly along those same lines, I'm looking at the assessment category, and in your presentation, you did refer to the industrial area, which I'm assuming is S block, yet we only have about 10,000, categorized as industrial. So I'm assuming all of the businesses in the industrial area are classified as non-residential. Why would we not have a separate class for like the S block or industrial area?
So the Municipal Government Act says that the assessment must be given one of four categories: residential, non-residential, machinery and equipment, or farmland. Well, we don't have any farmland. And then, so from a non-residential perspective, that industrial block would fall under that category. So the industrial line, can you see this slide that I have up, or do you see my face? I don't know what you're.
We see both.
Okay. So this industrial line there where it's 10 million, that's the properties that have some machinery and equipment on it, which would be the Kinder Morgan property outside of town and the Atco properties that pull, water from the river or generate power, things like that. That's what industrial means there. It doesn't mean the industrial subdivision in Jasper. Now, if that's something that interests you in terms of how did the assessments in that particular group of properties react compared to the rest of it, it's something I could certainly get and let you know. But it's for the purpose of this presentation, it's all included in the non-residential line.
Yeah, that answers my question. Thank you. And I guess I'll just throw one more question in there regarding category. I think I know the answer, but so I know federal residential buildings or Parks Canada residential buildings, they're assessed and we get payments in lieu of taxes for those. The other federal buildings, the info center, train station, Parks Canada building, are those buildings exempt? Or if not, what category are they categorized in?
It depends on the property. So the ones that you listed there, the info center would be exempt. the train station would be grant or payment in lieu of tax, but then there's also a portion of that would be simply non-residential, like the areas where they lease out. So Via Rail used to be operating out of there. They would have their own tax bill, their own assessment tax bill. Parks throughout the municipality where there's a playground, all of those would be exempt. And that's not unlike any other municipality in Alberta.
Sorry, I wasn't saying Parks, but so Parks Canada, their operations building.
Yeah, their operations building, again, part of it would be payment in lieu of tax, and if it met the criteria, part of it could be exempt. But for the most part, it's you collect taxes in the way of payment in lieu of taxes from the government. Yeah.
If I may try to pick up on that, appreciating that those properties are exempt, they are still assessed and they're required to be assessed. So how is the assessment done on exempt properties? It's not obviously on an income approach, and there is no market. So how do you assess the value of a church or a school or a Parks Canada building in Jasper?
Good question. Yeah, we rely on the cost approach. So essentially, we value the land as we value all the other land within the municipality. And then knowing that we have all the characteristics of the buildings, the age and size and type and all that kind of stuff, we build a cost model out of the characteristics of it, and the two added together equate to the cost approach assessment.
Thank you for that. In the absence of other questions, I had some confusion just occur in my own mind, and hopefully you can explain things to me. If you look at the slides, bring them up, beginning with, again, it's number 36, or pardon me, page 36 of our agenda. It's assessment change compared by percentage, got a really high blue streak on it. There we go.
Okay.
So I took all of the numbers on that page, blue and red. There are 1,224 residential units and 175 non-residential. And then 2 pages over, so if you go forward, it's assessment change compared by dollars. Same thing, the two numbers are the same, a total of 1,399 properties. But then 2 slides further on, distribution of residential assessed values.
Distribution of residential. I'm going backwards here. Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay.
So those numbers total 1,359. And on the following page, the distribution of non-residential totals 212, and adding those, we get 1,571 properties. I'm just wondering, how many properties are actually taxable? Because the numbers vary between 1,399 and 1,571 when I add those figures up.
So right here, there's 1,413 total properties, but you're getting a higher number because some properties have residential and some properties have commercial. So that when you do the math and you add each of those columns up, you're going to get a higher number than the total.
Thank you very much. So our total residential, non-residential taxpayer base is 1,413.
1,413 is all of your properties, everything residential, non-residential, exempt, everything all in. Then when you look at, yeah, these ones, when you add these up, oh, sorry, not that one, your distribution page. These ones are just residential, but part of these ones could also be commercial if there happens to be res and non-res use on it.
Right. But as I understood earlier, in those mixed properties where they are both residential and non-residential, if they are primarily residential, then you wouldn't see an increase in one component and a decrease in the other. Right, it would all be the same. If the market value of the residential property goes up, then the portion that's assessed to the commercial or non-residential will also go up.
If it is the approved accommodations property, that's exactly what happens. It could also be a hotel property that has a manager's suite in it, for example, and that wouldn't fall under that same style that you just noted on the home accommodations.
Thank you. And then the last question that I have, if you go back to the slide that has the 2020 to 2021 comparative assessments, the residential, non-residential, industrial exempt breakdown, right? So the breakdown there now currently about $1 billion worth of residential assessment and $590 million worth of non-residential assessment.
Yep.
In your experience, and given the fact that you have multiple municipalities and counties that you are the assessor for, how does that proportional split between residential and non-residential compared to other municipalities where you are the assessor?
In almost all of them, the residential base is far more of the total, a percentage of the total. And if I give you an example, look at the city of Spruce Grove, for example. It's one of my clients. You've got 15 or 18,000 residential properties and 500 non-residential properties. And none of the non-residential properties might be assessed to the magnitude that some of your properties are assessed at, just because of the nature of Jasper and everything that is involved in market value in Jasper. And that, then is a difficult thing when you compare tax burden with other municipalities like, say, Strathcona County, for example, which I'm not the assessor for, but I'm familiar with, where they have billions and billions of dollars of assessment on industrial. They can shift their tax burden away from the residential payer because they have that ability. Jasper is not, you don't have that luxury, right? You're, similar to Spruce Grove, the majority of your burden is going to be paid for by your residential property owner.
Thank you for that. But for the tax rate split, of course. I appreciate those comments. Is there anything else for Mr. Birtles? Councillor Wilson.
My apologies for all the questions, but feel a little more schooled in this after 4 years, and I can ask some questions rather than I'm like, last term I was overwhelmed. But the distribution of residential assessed values, I have to ask the question because I can't think of what property would be classified within this 0 to 200,000 assessed value, and there's 205 properties within it. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, that's your some of the condominiums would fall under that. And then there are also several properties at the riding stables, individually titled, and they all have to have assessments, and they're all under 200,000. So they fall into that category. I fully understand where you're coming from. What property in Jasper sells for 200 grand? Not very many. And then that could would also include properties that have a split. So maybe it's primarily non-residential, but there's a manager suite on site or something like that. That would fall into this category as well.
Okay, I thank you for pointing out that there's those two, yeah, for sure, the riding stables. I was assuming it was some of the older cooperative buildings. I wouldn't say a condominium. I couldn't see a condo being less than 200 here, but maybe the co-ops. And
yeah,
is that seems to be a challenge in our community with co-ops being set at a certain rate for resale. I think some of the older ones are under that $200,000 range, and I think I've heard the question asked before. I'm not sure there's an answer really to it, but is there an opportunity for us to be able to tax those properties that, you know, if on the free market would, you know, go for twice as much as what they're assessed at? Is that a possibility, or because they're a co-op and because they have a fixed sale price, it's just that, you know, increased taxes just are not available for those properties?
so the legislation in Alberta says assessments are to be recognizing a fee simple estate. What that means is you have the full bundle of rights. You can use your property, you can sell it, you can lease it, you can modify it, you can do all these things. Technically, the co-op properties, the people that occupy and own them, don't have the full bundle of rights. So you could argue that you would have to assess them based on a non-co-op sale price. And then you would have to go in front of a board and argue that, because no property owner at a co-op that knows that they can only sell their property for, let's say, 300,000 and gets an assessment for 500,000, no property owner would be okay with that. So at the end of the day, we're recognizing the title transfers that go through on the co-op properties to be fee simple. This could be a discussion we could have in more detail, but it had been challenged in the past, several years ago in Jasper, by a property owner that was not a co-op owner, and it went through the levels of hearing, and at the end of the day, the decision was made that the sale prices that go through land titles on the co-op properties, it would be more fair to apply that as your assessment target than it would be to apply other sales and otherwise increase the assessments of those properties. So the rest of the people in Jasper, I suppose you could say, are paying a portion that could be applied to the co-op properties, but it's a hard argument, right? It's not just as simple as saying yes you can or no you can't, but like there's a lot of things going into the creation of those assessments, and it's been considered many times, and at the end of all considerations, it's always been the same conclusion, that it appears to be less fair to do it the other way, if that makes sense.
No, I appreciate the answer. It's a tough question for sure.
Great, thank you again, Mr. Riddles. It looks like council has exhausted its questions, at least for today. Not to say that you won't get other calls as we move forward, but thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you for your time and your ability to answer so many questions that were thrown at you today.
You're welcome. Anytime. Anytime.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, council, we can move to agenda item 6. Bylaws 6.1, we have a bylaw summary just for information, and agenda item 6.2, Regional Assessment Review Board bylaw, coming before us for first and second reading, and Mr. Given.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. Director of Finance Administration, Chuck will take this one.
Good afternoon, Your Worship and Council. Today we're bringing the Regional Assessment Review Board bylaw back to Council to give first and second reading. The last time that Council saw this bylaw was in 2019. We provided just a little bit of a report to front the bylaw itself. Historically, the municipality of Jasper has been a member of the Regional Assessment Review Board with the town of Hinton, Edson, and Grand Cache. Each community must pass a bylaw to establish a regional board and become a part of it. Since then, the town of Grand Cache, as you know, has dissolved, and their assessment appeals actually will now be handled by the municipal of Greenview. Each MD of Greenview. Each council must appoint their own board members, so 2 or more per municipality, and their own municipal board clerk. And having a regional board enables the smaller communities to share those board member resources. This bylaw comes to council for review because there has been some changes due to the dissolving of Grand Cache. And the Improvement District 12 would like to join the board on terms specified under agreement, which is attached to this report. Correspondence has been had with Hinton and Edson, and they are both favorable to and okay with this change in our bylaw because it would ultimately affect them as well. And ID 12 has the assistant deputy mayor, minister appointed as council per ministerial order, and has signed off to allow the ID 12 to enter into an agreement with the municipality of Jasper. For this, I wanted to mention under financial implications, I had written in a comment at the very bottom, should the service be provided, municipality will invoice the ID 12 for the services provided. However, I'd just like to highlight that that's not the case. What would happen would be an annual contribution by the ID 12 to the municipality that we would be providing these should ID 12 need our assistance. And that's written within the terms of the contract. I went back to read the contract and meant to change it here, but I forgot. I apologize for that. So the expenses for the board hearings in general will be borne by the municipality in which the assessed property is located. So that would occur for Hinton, Edson, and ourselves. And then if it occurred that the ID 12 had any borne expenses, we would take care of those. But like I said, we would be invoicing the ID 12 for $2,000 annually. So this is more than fair for the municipality to go into this contract with them, being that we have to also have those board representatives. Attached to this report is the old or current bylaw, which is 210. And then attached are the changes highlighted within the context of the new bylaw that is present today for first and second reading for council. To just highlight some of those changes, it would ultimately repeal 210, and it would make this Regional Assessment Review Board 2022. In 2.1.8, it would then cross out the town of Grand Cache, but replace it with the Improvement District 12. In 4.3, the specialized municipality of Jasper shall act as a representative for the ID 12 on the Regional Board Review Committee, subject to a valid and current agreement which is attached between the specialized municipality of Jasper and the Improvement District of 12. And 6.4, notwithstanding section 6.1, Improvement District 12 shall be exempt from the responsibility to appoint members to the LARB and CARB pursuant to this bylaw, subject to the valid and current agreement between the Specialized Municipality of Jasper and the ID 12. And that covers, I believe, covers all of the changes that would occur to the current bylaw going forward. Next on the sheet, you can see a draft of the agreement that could be signed between ID 12 and the municipality, which also, this is the bylaw, and then also the agreement that has been drafted that can be signed between the municipality of Jasper and the ID 12. Just a couple other things to highlight is that Banff currently does this as well with ID 9, being that we're a bit different than everyone else and their situations. So they do hold the same kind of agreement with their ID. And the ID 12 has not seen any kind of complaint processes that have gone to the hearings in over 10 years. So just wanted to suggest that, or let council know that it's not that they haven't had many complaints or hearings proceed, and that is just given on historical of from a staff member that has just come on and did a quick look for me. So, and that should highlight everything that would change within the context of this bylaw. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Mrs. Downship. Questions from councillors? Councillor Wilson.
Just a question about ID 12 and our communication with them. In my experience, we haven't had too much, like as council, much experience communicating or with ID 12, and I was just interested on who would have been the person or group at ID 12 that would have shown interest in joining our joining the board.
I often deal with the ID 12, especially when it comes down to dealings with protective services. They often contribute to the funding for protective services. I also deal with them as they support Jasper as a municipality in some of grant fundings. They will support some of they will contribute some of their money to municipality in the past for MSI, so Municipal Sustainability Initiative, as well as the federal gas tax in the past. So the communication definitely stemmed from having the conversation with the people there. I don't know exactly their title. I didn't see it actually in their last email, but my correspondence also suggested that maybe we should go this direction. They have to be part and parcel of a board. And so we started the conversations, and then also we looked up what Banff does and seen that they have been part and parcel of their board in the past. And supposedly in the past, and this is prior to myself coming on, that we have handled their complaints before. So it has occurred, but we're just being a bit formalized. This would have been a long, long time ago, obviously, over 10 years. But we're being more formal in setting up this agreement between us.
Thank you for that. Councillor Keller-Herndon.
Thank you, Mr. Novichok. I just want to clarify, so our two board members that we have currently on from Jasper will represent ID 12 as well, am I correct?
Yes, through your worship, through to Councillor Keller-MP. Yes, that is correct.
So for the clerical work that we take in turn, so we do 2 rotations?
Sorry, may you repeat the question?
So we provide a clerk to do some of the work, and we each take rotation with Exon and Hinton, and we're representing ID 12. So that means that the person that we have doing this work, they take 2 terms.
We have in the past actually done 2 terms in a consecutive order, and that discussion has not occurred on whether or not we would have us represent 2 times in a row just because we're representing the ID 12. That can definitely come up as a conversation as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? Perhaps you just did in answer to Councillor Keller-Grantley, but just for clarity, you can confirm that the municipality of Jasper is current with its appointment of members to the Lards and the Carbs.
Yes.
Thank you. If there are no further questions of administration, is there a councillor prepared to give a motion for first reading? Councillor Keller-Grantley. I have a motion from Councillor Keller-Grantley that council give first reading to the Assessment Review Board bylaw. Any debate? All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. I will assume that Councillor Keller-Grantley was intending to make both motions, so I have a motion from Councillor Keller-Grantley that council give second reading to the Assessment Review Board bylaw. There's no debate. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Thank you both for that presentation. Do we need a motion with respect to the agreement? I'm not sure if we have a prepared motion, but let me check. Doesn't appear we do.
No, sorry, Your Worship. I'll just say that I think the direction to amend the bylaw suffice. I don't know if we need the agreement. I think bylaw lays out all the requirements that would be needed for the municipality to turn to that, including so I think the agreements provide the council information and administration will enact that at the administrative level. Now that council approved the acceptance of ID 12
All right, thank you. I'm content with that. I just want to make sure that we don't overlook it while we have the opportunity. Force you to come back later. But that is fine then. That takes us to agenda item 7. Before I proceed, does council require or desire any sort of a recess? I see an indication, a positive indication for a recess, so I will call 5 minutes. We will reconvene at 2:55. All right, welcome back. It is 2:56 and we can resume with agenda item 7.1, request for decision respecting the municipal employee housing policy. Mr. Given.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. This item was discussed at a previous committee of the whole meeting, and so there is a recommendation from the committee that council approve the municipal employee housing policy as amended. There's an amended version that reflects the feedback provided by the committee, and we can go through those changes. But I'll just maybe cover the overall policy intent. It is obviously really widely acknowledged that Jasper has a tight housing market where there's low supply and low vacancy rates and high costs. And of course, in this context, housing is a key challenge for employers of all types, and the municipality of Jasper is no different. The challenge of recruiting a municipality, an employee to the municipality of Jasper is really compounded by the lack of available appropriate housing supply. and can be a key barrier to our ability to deliver the services and programs in the municipality to the public. In communities such as ours, it's typical for the municipality to take some kind of active role in employee housing. Specifically in the report, we reference Whistler and Banff, where similar communities who take roles, although each of them have their slight nuance. The municipality of Whistler takes quite a broad role in supplying employee housing for all types of employers, including the municipality and private sector employers, where Banff has a narrow focus on municipal employees and what they call associated agencies, things like their special purpose bodies that deliver municipal-like services, or the RCMP, for example. But in any case, municipalities facing the same housing challenges as Jasper often take some kind of formalized role in employee housing. The municipality of Jasper has not previously had an employee housing policy, although we have had a long-standing practice of having some municipal housing that has been available for employees. And we also have employees who live in private housing that has been secured by the municipality and that we rent out on a room basis to often seasonal or temporary employees. In this context, there was a bit of a challenge. I think the council wanted to ensure that there was equity and rationale behind how that housing was allocated and what the municipality's overall intent is. And that's the purpose of having the policy here for council consideration. Some of the highlights in the attached policy include a commitment to fully complying with the Alberta Residential Tenancy Act, which I think is a pretty straightforward provision. But also there's an explicit commitment to setting the rents at the lower of 15% what would be going Jasper market rate for similar properties, or 30% of employees' gross monthly income. That 30% number is important because it is the traditional and widely used definition of affordable housing used by both the province of Alberta and the federal government. And so this is a commitment to ensuring that Jasper municipal employee housing is affordable for employees, because we recognize that that is a key challenge to attracting people if housing is not affordable. Even if we have it, we may not still be able to recruit. The policy also envisions a commitment to ensure that there is a maximum occupancy of housing units. Or I should maybe say that differently, that the housing that we have goes to good use. It is not in the municipality's interest or the general community's interest for there to be housing that is vacant for any period of time. And so there's a need to balance availability for municipal employees along with ensuring that available housing is being used by the community somewhere. The policy does allow for the municipality to use excess employee housing in partnership with other entities within the community. And so that is accounted for in the policy. And the policy also makes provisions for full-time municipal employees relocating Jasper, seasonal or term employees, maybe here on a temporary basis, and also, as I mentioned before, working with other employers to ensure that units that would otherwise be vacant are actually used to help address the housing crunch in our community. So the policy is in front of you. I won't read through the policy. You can see a marked up version that incorporates the changes as requested at the committee level. The policy describes the overall policy intent, the scope and who the policy applies to and types, and the standards. And I would draw council's attention specifically to 3.3.1 to 3.3.3, which really describes three different types of municipal employees. First would be transition employees who are full-time employees transitioning into Jasper. And the intent there is to provide essentially a landing place for employees to come into the community, and to balance that off with ensuring that we provide them an opportunity for a stable foundation in the community, to explore other market rate opportunities, and that there's a defined period so that everybody comes in with the same understanding. So that's identified that transitional housing should not exceed 36 months in use. The second section is temporary housing for seasonal or term employees during their period of employment with the municipality. And this identifies that the housing term should be aligned with the term of their employment, along with some additional flexibility to ensure that there is a grace period to allow the employee to move in, move out time as their employment ends. And then finally, a commitment to identifying that if the municipality is ever in a situation where we have excess housing units that are vacant in an off season, that we would be able to have the authorities, administration to work with other employers or private sector employers to ensure that those units are utilized rather than sitting vacant when somebody may be in need. Your worship, I think that's the overview that I'll provide. The document is there for you and incorporates the recommended changes from committee, and the recommendation from committee is that council adopt the municipal employee housing policy.
Thank you, Mr. Given. Questions by councillors of administration? Councillor Wilson?
Sure. Just a question on 3.3.1. Rental duration for transitional housing shall not exceed 36 months. Would that 36 months start once we adopt this policy, or individuals who've been in transitional housing prior? Put a time on.
Thanks very much, Worship, for Councillor Wilson. I suppose that's an area that council could provide further definition to. My interpretation, or the way that I would apply this, would be that it would be from the date that council has adopted the policy, unless council provided any other direction. We certainly want to ensure that any employees that are here with the municipality in employee housing are treated fairly and that they have predictability. That's important for their stability, just personally and in their family lives, but also as employees in the municipality. So I think that the way that I would implement this at the administrative level would be to begin to enact the policy subsequent to council's approval and adoption of it.
Other questions for Mr. Given or administration? Mr. Given, and from me, just a couple of questions, and these are things that might be resolved in the procedures. But if you are able to give any clarification, it would be useful. The Jasper market rate is used twice in the document. Can we set out how the Jasper market rate is determined?
Yes, thank you, Worship. So there are a couple of different definitions of what the going rate is for housing in the municipality. The province of Alberta publishes regular schedules of that. But I think that most people that view that would recognize it as maybe not as finely attuned to Jasper's specific circumstance or as current as it might be. So you'll see in the policy we have a definition of what we mean by Jasper market rate. It's on the very last page, slightly separated from the rest. So the Jasper market rate means the average monthly rental rate charged for housing available on the private market in Jasper, as determined through a biannual survey conducted by municipal administration. So essentially, twice a year, municipal administration would survey the private market. We would probably use a couple of different means, just direct personal contact, phoning companies or businesses that have places for rent, identifying what the rate is for local properties that would compare some of ours. We would also likely survey other employers to find out what they're charging for employee housing. And to the extent possible, we would go through other publicly available sources of rental market information. And we would blend all that to come up with what the Jasper market rental rate would be. We would do the biannual survey to ensure that we're keeping pace with any changes in the market, either up or down, and to ensure that our rates are appropriate and reflect what the market rates are.
Thank you for that. And the other very general matter is under 3.1, we will, of course, as we are required to do, comply with the Alberta Residential Tenancies Act. But I take it that we will comply with those provisions which apply to employers as landlords.
Yes, Your Worship, that's correct.
Thank you for that. I have nothing further. If there are no further questions of administration, is there a councillor prepared to make a motion? Councillor Melnick?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Your Worship. I do move that council approve the municipal employee housing policy as presented.
Thank you. I see no hands looking for debate. I will call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. That takes us to agenda item 7.2, a request for decision to rescind policy B009, fiscal and financial control policy. Again, Mr. Given.
Your Worship, this may sound familiar because on March 15th, the Council approved policy B109, the fiscal controls of financial reporting policy, which replaced and superseded policy B009. There was administrative oversight on my part of not also recommending the council rescind the existing policy. Just so as a matter of process, we need to do away with formally council rescinding the old policy now that the new policy has been presented. In future, these will both, because when we're dealing with policies, new or revised policies, you'll see a recommendation that council approve the new policy and then a follow-up recommendation of the same RFD that council rescind the old policy. That step was missed in this case on my part. So this is a simple administrative request for council to make that formalization of rescinding the old policy so we can take it off the website and deal with it better.
Thank you for that, Mr. Given. And I take it it goes with the territory that if council rescinds the policy, the attached procedures are also repealed or rescinded. But we don't need a motion for that because council doesn't actually set those. Administration through the office of the CAO does those.
Yes, Your Worship, that's correct. In the case of the fiscal and financial controls policy, the 109 will still use many of the same administrative procedures, but we do need to, as I think we acknowledged during the recommendation on B109, we do need to go through and fully revise those administrative procedures as well. And we'll inform council about council-facing elements of that. I know there are a number of areas where the administrative procedures implicate council. And so if there are any significant or material changes to those things, we bring them forward to your attention. The administrative procedure for B09 does not need to be removed because we'll continue to work with it and generally apply it to the new guidelines and direction that are set out by 109. If and when we decide to make material changes to the administrative procedure, we would inform council that so that you're aware.
Thank you for that. Any other questions of administration regarding this request for decision? If not, is there a motion? Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, I would like to make the motion that council rescind policy B009, fiscal and financial control.
See no hands looking for debate. I will call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Thank you for that. Takes us to agenda item 7.3, which is a request for a proclamation, National Volunteer Week. Mr. Given, we're going to speak to this at all?
Only very briefly, Your Worship. The municipality has a policy that any community organization that wishes to seek a proclamation or recognition of their events must do so, make that request in writing to council to receive formal council approval for that proclamation. In front of you, you'll see a request to proclaim Volunteer Week 2022. The request is aligned with the requirements of the policy. And the administration, of course, doesn't have an RFD because this is coming from the community. You're likely to see more of these, but there is the draft proclamation contained in the package, and administration's just said there was an administrative recommendation, and now I'm going to say that there is. Administration can advise council that this request is made in full conformance with the policy, with council's policy. And so should you choose to support the proclamation, you could do so by resolution here today.
Thank you for that. Any questions of administration? So, Councillor with the motion. Councillor Hall.
The longest one. I move that council approve the the volunteer. Sorry, I'm ahead of myself. Am I just making a motion that we approve this proclamation?
Yes.
I would like to make a motion that council approves the National Volunteer Week proclamation.
That sufficiently covers it. And we have in the past, for many years, proclaimed National Volunteer Week, and it's a great opportunity to recognize volunteers in our community. They are the lifeblood of this community and other communities. It is absolutely appropriate that we do proclaim National Volunteer Week, so I certainly support the motion. Call the question if you're ready. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried, and then I do therefore proclaim April 24th to 30th, 2022 as National Volunteer Week in the municipality of Jasper, and urge our fellow citizens to recognize the crucial role played by volunteers in our community. Thank you for that. That takes us to agenda item 7.4, West Yellowhead Regional Waste Management Authority Governance and Administration Plan. Mr. Given.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. I know that we covered this just last week with a pretty extensive report, so I will be very brief in my comments. The committee is recommending the council approve the West Yellowhead Regional Waste Management Authority and management agreements. And there may be some other discussion, but the essence of this request is that the West Yellowhead Regional Waste Management Authority is a longstanding body. The municipality of Jasper has been party to since 2014. This is a update of the agreement between the municipalities for the formation of the authority. And there's an additional agreement that between the authority and a manager. And in this case, it's proposed that the Yellowhead County serve as the manager. So there are two different agreements in front of you. One is between the municipality of Jasper, the county of Yellowhead, Edson and Hinton for the formation of the Waste Management Authority. And the other is the management agreement that defines how administrative support will be provided, the standards of that support for the authority, and the terms of payment and cost for that. So these are here for council consideration. These were also brought forward to all the other partner municipalities on the 19th. My administrative understanding is that those were reviewed and forwarded on to all the respective councils. And so we are seeking essentially simultaneous adoption of these or support for these from all the partner municipalities. Your Worship, if there are any questions of the specifics, I'm happy to answer those for council.
Thank you, Mr. Given. Further questions? Councillor Wilson.
I think, Mayor Island, you were going to reach out to your fellow mayors and seek clarification. I think in between, can you speak to that?
I can, and I was, and when I got myself prepared to do that, I thought better of it. My concerns remain, but I've formulated a slightly different approach, which I'll explain in a minute. But I had two concerns. One is whether there is proper recognition at the board that the way we have dealt with the budget, I think, leads us inexorably to the position that the authority becomes a requisitioning authority for other councils. And I have some concerns about that, particularly because Section 23 provided that budgetary disagreement go ultimately to arbitration. So it would be out of the hands of individual councils, pardon me. And the other concern was with two clauses late in the agreement, 45 and 46, I think, that deal with a requirement for unanimity if a member wants to exit. And the flip side of unanimity is the veto power. And I had some concerns in principle, but on reflection, my concerns, although based on principle, probably would never affect Jasper. It could affect Yellowhead County much more because our contribution to the authority is based on the tonnage that we provide, and Jasper's down around 11%. So if we have a veto at 11%, maybe we wouldn't complain. But if we have a veto at 11%, maybe somebody with 41% would be concerned about that. But maybe they should raise it if they are. So if I may relinquish the chair to our deputy mayor, I'm in a position to make a motion having considered those items.
Go ahead, Mayor.
I would deviate just slightly from the committee recommendation that we dealt with only a week ago, and I would amend it to a motion as follows. That council approve the West Yellowhead Regional Waste Management Authority and the management agreement as presented, and that council authorize its appointed representatives to raise issues of concern with the board and to accept the majority decision of the board with respect to any proposed amendments. So my intent here is to accept it as it came to us. Other municipalities are going to be presented the same thing. Councillor Wilson and I are the appointed representatives to this board, and I would still like to raise the issue with the board. If it doesn't get traction, that's the end of it. If it does get some traction, if other communities are interested and see the issue as I do, perhaps there'll be some amendments, but I don't want to have this go in circles interminably and come back to us. So if Councillor Wilson and I raise the issue and there is uptake, then our council is already on board with those changes. But in the long run, those changes are probably more important to other members than they are to us. And if they don't, as I say, get traction, I think we can live with it the way it is. That is the result of a week of thinking about this and not quite sure how to raise it with other councils that have not perhaps considered this in the same perspective.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. Any questions or debates? Seeing as none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Carried. Emma, did you get everything you needed for the? Thank you. I will now turn back to Chair tomorrow.
Thank you for that. Deputy Mayor Kelleher takes us to agenda item 7.5. At the time, I'm afraid. Is that the motion action list? Is that? Oh, not 7.5. We concluded 7. Agenda item 8, correspondence for information, consideration, or action. There is nothing of which I am aware. Other new business? Is there any other business for council that any councillor wishes to raise? If not, agenda item 10, the motion action list. In this stage here for information, it was just updated a week ago. If there's nothing arising from that, councillor reports. Are there any reports? Councillor Kelleher.
Last week I missed our committee meeting. I was in Calgary at the Alberta Seniors Housing and Community Association conference. All of the Evergreen board was present there. It was an excellent conference. I attended many seminars. But what I did find really interesting was the Alberta government is bringing out a new framework for housing, affordable and for seniors housing. And currently they have 6 different categories, which we're bringing down to 2. The framework is starting to be developed. Hopefully by October, we will have more information on that. One of the ones that I found interesting was partnerships. They're looking at buy-in from communities and partnerships. So I thought that would fall nicely that when we have talked about affordable housing and some of our businesses wanting to buy in. And as I get more information on this, I'll pass it along to Councillor Reports. But overall, it is an excellent conference. I would like to suggest that maybe next year that whoever's the chair of the housing committee might like to go to that conference. It was excellent. The information was just amazing. I learned so much at this conference, all about housing and senior housing. There's some excellent speakers there. And at the end, they had 3 seniors from different housing complexes, affordable in Calgary, and each told their story of why it was important. It was very powerful.
Thank you for that, Councillor Calabresi. Other reports? Councillor Melnick.
Just to update your worship, the trail cleanup, the times on Friday would be noon and also 5 o'clock. Meeting here at the library. I noticed there was TBA on the agenda, but if members of council and the general public would like to join us, that would be terrific. Great way to recognize Earth Day on the 22nd.
Thank you for that. If I might just return to agenda item 11 briefly. And not so much a report, I suppose, but just an acknowledgement that all of council and key staff attended a strategic priorities session 2 weeks ago. And there has been no report about that. We are still awaiting a draft document from the consultant, but I just wanted to acknowledge Emma in particular for the excellent work in getting us organized to get down to Banff and back again, and the accommodations and meals and the rest of it. It worked out really well, I thought, from my perspective at least, that it was really an excellent session, worth the time that everyone invested in it to look at our strategic priorities, and this really will make a difference for the remainder of this term. I'm really excited about it, and I trust that those staff members who attended also saw a benefit in it. So I want to acknowledge that that is underway, still unfolding, and it will be back at this table ultimately for us to approve our strategic priorities, but it was a great step in the right direction, I thought. And then sometime in the last little while since our last meeting, I think, there has been a federal budget, and there is again significant funding for housing. And I've spoken with Mr. Gibbon as the CAO also of the Jasper Community Housing Corporation. And we will look into opportunities to avail ourselves of some of that new funding to again tackle the perennial issue of housing in Jasper. And coincidentally, having met with Minister Boissonneau in the last few weeks, he encouraged us to keep him apprised of where we stand with respect to matters. So we will get him some information about our last applications, which fell short, but at least it will inform him and perhaps position him to be a greater advocate for our needs as we move forward. And I think that that is all that I have for reports. Oh no, I can do this when we actually get to agenda item 12, where Mr. Melnick was trying to take us. So upcoming events, we've heard about the Rotary Club Trail cleanup for Earth Day. Thank you, Councillor Melnick. Is there anything else on the list that ought to be addressed? not on the list because it is not necessarily a public event, but in concert, I suppose, with the Jasper Park Chamber of Commerce General Meeting tomorrow, at which there will be 4 members of Parliament, including our own Member of Parliament, Mr. Gerald Soroka. I have been invited to a meeting with those 4 MPs at 1:30 tomorrow afternoon, so I will attend that. And my understanding is that they will also be available for the NETMA event at Papa George's tomorrow afternoon. So if any of you are available and would like to meet and rub shoulders and maybe converse a bit with some members of Parliament who will be in town, tomorrow is your opportunity, or at least an opportunity. And that is it for me. Is there anything else to add that is not on the list? If not, I would welcome a motion to adjourn. Councillor Wilson, I was at the ready. All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you all very much. Members of staff who were tuned in and members of the public, thank you all for your interest today. And we will see you 9:30 a.m. next Tuesday morning. Thank you all.